Almost everyone today is aware of the attitudes Jung created, introversion and extroversion, but most people are unaware of the four functions he brought forward in the exact same work, psychological types. These are feeling, thinking, sensation, and intuition. In this video, I'm going to focus on the introverted feeling type, how you can identify your type, how it plays out, and some general advice. First of all, it is important to remember that the feeling type is a rational function. Many people conflate feelings and emotions and altogether categorize this function as irrational, but that would be a mistake. Jung compromised feeling and thinking as the rational functions and sensation and intuition as irrational. Thinking, which is more straightforward to understand, is a judgment of logic based on objective criteria. That means it is a rational function that judges whether things are logically true or false in an external sense. Feeling, however, is also a rational function because it judges and draws conclusions based on whether things are valuable, agreeable, or worthy of our care. It's crucial to see that both functions make a conscious judgment, but based on entirely different criteria. While thinking is concerned with what does this mean, feeling is concerned with what is this worth. Their values differ from the subjective and the objective, but they still both operate on a set of values. Unlike the irrational functions, which simply perceive the information without assigning judgment. I'll use an example. Two different types of people walk into a bakery and see that a pastry costs £5. The thinking type might say, at £5, this pastry is overpriced compared to the average price of a pastry. It's not a good value. Whilst the feeling type might say, I enjoy treating myself on Sundays. Besides, it's a good vibe in here. I don't mean to bore you, but you get a sense of the different modes and different systems each person has here for evaluating things. Now, to quickly clarify on introversion and extroversion, introversion is when a person's psychic energy or libido flows inward towards the subjective world, and extrovert's energy flows outward toward the external world of people, objects, and actions. With some reflection, you should be able to make this assessment of yourself. Remember, an introvert doesn't mean someone who cowers away from socializing and has no self-esteem, just like not every extrovert is brimming with confidence. This is simply where the energy flows. Does it go outward or inward? Any of the four functions can either be introverted or extroverted, which is also important to remember. You can have an introverted thinking type and an extroverted feeling type. For today's video, we will be talking about the introverted feeling type, which is only one of the combinations out of the 8 variations. I might make this a series and go over the other 7 in separate videos. Interestingly enough, when Jung talks about the introverted feeling type, he constantly refers to she or her, and this is because he categorized this type as being mostly found in women. As a man, I guess I'm unique in this way. Now, not only do these types rationalize subjectively, but they are also more focused on the subjective world, making for a rather intense inner life. Funnily enough, these types can seem cold and reserved at face value because they find it hard to express their sympathies outward. I remember getting told by co-workers or other people that I always looked moody or cold or rude, and this always confused me because internally I was a world of emotions and passions. But it makes sense that that never really translated well in the quote-unquote real world. Jung states, since this type appears rather cold and reserved, it might seem on a superficial view that such women have no feelings at all. But this would be quite wrong. The truth is, their feelings are intensive rather than extensive. They develop in depth, while an extensive feeling of sympathy can express itself in appropriate words and deeds, and thus quickly gets back to normal again. An intensive sympathy, being shut off from every means of expression, acquires a passionate depth that compromises a whole world of misery and simply gets benumbed. It may perhaps break out in some extravagant form and lead to an astounding act of an almost heroic character, quite unrelated either to the subject herself or to the object that provoked the outburst. To the outside world, or to the blind eyes of the extrovert, this intensive sympathy looks like coldness, because usually it does nothing visible, and an extrovert consciousness is unable to believe in invisible forces. Such a misunderstanding is a common occurrence in the life of this type, and is used as a weighty argument against the possibility of any deeper feeling relation with the object. But the real object of this feeling is only dimly divined by the normal type herself. It may express itself in a secret religiosity anxiously guarded from profane eyes, or in intimate poetic forms that are kept equally well hidden, not without the secret ambition of displaying some kind of superiority over the other person by this means. Women often express a good deal of their feelings through their children, letting their passions flow secretly into them. End quote. So as you can see, Jung heavily found this type in women. He says, quote, it is principally among women that I have found the predominance of introverted feeling. Still waters run deep is very true of such women. They are mostly silent, inaccessible, hard to understand. Often they hide behind a childish or banal mask, and their temperament is inclined to melancholy. They neither shine nor reveal themselves, as they are mainly guided by their subjective feelings. Their true motives generally remain hidden. Their outward demeanor is harmonious, inconspicuous, giving an impression of pleasing repose or of sympathetic response, with no desire to affect others, to impress, influence, or change them in any way. If this outward aspect is more pronounced, it arouses suspicion. End quote. As you might be thinking, this is of course a complicated type, as all are in their own respects. And Jung elaborated on this as well, saying, quote, it is extremely difficult to give an intellectual account of the introverted feeling process, or even an approximate description of it. Although the peculiar nature of this kind of feeling is very noticeable once one has become aware of it, since it is conditioned subjectively and is only secondarily concerned with the object. It seldom appears on the surface and is generally misunderstood. It is a feeling which seems to devalue the object, and it therefore manifests itself for the most part negatively. The existence of positive feeling can be inferred only indirectly. Its aim is not to adjust itself to the object, but to subordinate it in an unconscious effort to realize the underlying images. It is continually seeking an image which has no existence in reality, but which it has seen in a kind of vision. It glides unheedingly over all objects that do not fit in with its aim. It strives after inner intensity. I think it is very challenging to understand this type. Not only, by the way, end quote for the Jung quote. I think it is very challenging to understand this type. Not only is it subjective in its evaluation, but it focuses on the internal work in the internal world. These people may seem airy or ungrounded in some way. They may struggle to even maintain contact with the real world. The primary energy of this type is directed inward, prioritizing the subjective factor to seek out inner intensity and realize underlying psychological images. When the feeling type is healthy, the feeling is directed inward to nourish the wellspring of their self. And this is another thing that Jung pointed out, that a lot of the times the introverted feeling type, or less generally the introvert, feels as though there is something wrong with the way they operate. It is not hard to understand why in our fast-paced Western society that requires you to be consumed in the external world at all times, whether that's using technology or our corporate job or being drowned in the world of consumerism. It is a material world. And I have to say that I think generally the extrovert is better adapted for the spirit of the times now. Jung says, quote, the undervaluation of his internal principle makes the introvert egotistical and forces upon him the psychology of the underdog. He must learn to depend on the subjective factor with the same trust and devotion with which the extrovert relies on the object. End quote. Here, Jung clearly tells us that we need to work with our forces and not against them. Not uphill, not against the stream. This will never work. I'm sure it has been hard pressed into the brains of many introverts that introversion is a weakness, that it is insufficient, lazy, boring, and the rest. But this is totally wrong. If there is anything to take away from Jung's psychology, it is that there are really no good and evils in the way we see them today, but an integration that is healthy. If we deny our introversion, our subjective value systems, we are just nullifying ourselves and stunting our own growth. As Jung says, we must learn to love these qualities, and importantly, to seriously rely on them. Do not make the mistake of believing that the objective world holds more weight. Jung also noted that there is a difference between active feeling and passive feeling. Of course, if your type is feeling, you are in conscious control of it and can switch it on consciously when you like. But a lot of us have become very reactive to the world around us, and some of that has to do with what we discussed earlier in not taking their value system seriously, or believing we need to catch up to the objective and logical view, thereby not even going over the facts of our value systems ever. Jung gives us an example of loving versus being in love. One is rational action, the other is passive and almost intuitive feeling. I say this because I believe it is important for the feeling type to grow, and by going over their values, we water that soil. To consciously decide that what we feel is right and what serves us is a great step, and any feeling type will already have a sense of excitement from this idea. I would say go over your values, journal, come to deep connection with your feeling, and outline what sits right with you and what doesn't, what are old, outdated values, and what needs to come in for you to evolve and be a better version of yourself. Now, of course, if your dormant function Now, of course, if your dominant function is feeling, your opposition will be thinking. This is completely unconscious to you and manifests itself in outbursts that can be quite cruel at face value. Jung says, quote, "The stronger the conscious feeling is, and the more ego-less it becomes, the stronger grows the unconscious opposition. The unconscious thinking reaches the surface in the form of obsessive ideas, which are invariably of a negative and depreciatory character. Women of this type have moments when the most hideous thoughts fasten on the very objects most valued by their feelings. This negative thinking utilizes every infantile prejudice or comparison for the deliberate purpose of casting aspersions on the feeling value, and musters every primitive instinct in the attempt to come out with nothing but interpretations." End quote. As we see, the unconscious thinking function can lash out in almost compulsive ways. It attacks the things you value most by your feelings and can therefore really strike home. If you deal with something like intrusive thoughts or inversions of things you care deeply about, this could be why. It is important to understand this thinking is like the neglected child of the home who attacks out of resentment and a lack of nurture. But do not think you can instantly develop your thinking function right out of the gate if you are a feeling type. It takes time and a lot of patience. It is possibly a lifelong journey. In fact, if you are a feeling type, your thinking function will be the last function you fully mature. You must begin to mature your auxiliary function first, which is your second, then your third, and finally thinking, which will always be the fourth in this case, as thinking and feeling are direct opposites. One becomes two, two becomes three, and out of the third comes the fourth as the one. Of course, there are steps you can take to integrate your opposite in a slow and steady manner. I think routine is crucial for this type. Developing your dis developing your discipline and making sure you have some form of social life is an important step. But do not get upset or flustered that your social life doesn't look like Gatsby's. At the end of the day, you should honor your type and work with it. If you do it, it will help you. If you work against it, it may only make you suffer more. But I think it's important to find some middle ground and balance. Do not leave here as an introverted feeling type, thinking you can become a hermit and descend into your cave forever, and that will be okay. It really won't. As much as we might be dominant in one aspect, we do possess all aspects. It's just that some remain immature and more unconscious than others. Jung's goal has always been wholeness in the very end, but without using your main function with devotion, you will never reach there. See your primary function as a key. It is a gift to unlock the next door, which has the next key for the door after that. If you throw away your key and say, "I will try and slam down every door in my way," the oppos in opposition, it will get you nowhere. Jung also tells us that the logical mind versus your feelings is a back and forth that can drain your energy. Instead of letting one side win, you hold the tension between them, you listen to them both seriously, and a new third thing emerges naturally. This will be a living image or a symbol. This is what he called the transcendent function, a new living symbol that becomes your guiding force. This works by channeling your energy. Jung calls these symbols living forms. They are representations of the outward path of life and serve to determine the mediating will. This is something I may expand on at another time, since it really encompasses more than just the introverted feeling type. However, I think it's important to take the first small steps, and the rest comes naturally, in my mind anyway. There are many exercises out there to give your unconscious side a voice, and I think these are worth looking at. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to follow for more.